Lippitt. And we are recording as you just heard. I'm John Lippitt. I'm a member of the PDM, Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts leadership team. I also am the chair of the Legislative Effectiveness and Accountability Partnership, a ballot committee that's sponsoring the Stipend Reform ballot question. I'm sitting in for John Hecht, who we had hoped and planned would be the moderator here today because of his experience in the legislature. But he had a family situation come up that he needed to deal with. So I'm sitting in for him. Welcome all. We really appreciate your being here. This is going to be a fabulous forum. As you know, we'll be recording it. We will be posting it to our website, and we will send all of you the link as soon as it's available. Please share it with friends and colleagues who couldn't join us here today and spread the word. If you have questions for the panelists, please put them in the chat. We'll also use the chat to share links. And as I say, if people want to share just who they are, where they're from, or any organizational affiliations, that'd be great. But we do ask that you not use the chat for side conversations because they can be distracting and also make it harder to extract the questions and links that we want to share. Just really quick background on Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts. We were founded in 2003, largely by a group of people who'd volunteered for Bob Reich's campaign for governor. We are an all-volunteer statewide organization that's focused specifically on state and local policies and state and local elected offices. Transition to our forum here today. We've been doing forums on about a monthly basis. They're all out on our website. You can go and look through the history of them and click on the recordings of them if you're interested. A lot of great content there. But today we're going to be talking about who plays by the rules, assessing Joint Committee rules reform. So as many of you know, after years of advocacy, in last June, the House and Senate adopted several new rules for the Joint Committee's operation. The rules were intended to provide more transparency and facilitate more public participation. For example, the new rules require 10 days of notice for hearings, posting online plain language summaries of bills, making public legislators' attendance and votes, establishing hearing schedules earlier in the legislative session, and making written testimony publicly available. We are very lucky today to have with us three very knowledgeable panelists who can provide real in-depth info and insight into these rules and the operation of our legislature. They'll discuss whether the legislature is complying with these new rules and whether the rules changes have resulted in what, as you may remember, the House Speaker promised early on in the term that they would deliver a more accessible and efficient legislature that is responsive to the concerns of our constituents, end quote. So we'll see if that has actually happened. So let me just briefly give you intros of our three panelists, and then I'll turn it over to them to present our information for today. Scotia Hille is the executive director of Act on Mass. She's worked with Act on Mass for over 5 years, first as a volunteer and then as a regional organizer. And after completing a master's degree in local and regional climate policy, she returned to Act on Mass in 2024 as its executive director. Drew Bowler is a software engineer who has spent many, many hours, I can't imagine how long it's taken, working with grassroots organizations to build the Beacon Hill Compliance Tracker, which he will talk about, a nonpartisan tool that documents how well the Massachusetts legislature is or isn't following its own new rules. And finally, we have Denise Provo, an attorney who represented Somerville as a state rep for 14 years from 2006 until 2020. And before her legislative service, she was a member of the Somerville Board of Aldermen. We are lucky to have all three of them with us. So Scotia, why don't I turn it over to you to kick off a little background on these rules and how we got them.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So great to be here today. Thank you to PDM for hosting. Great to see some familiar faces in the crowd. Excited to talk about one of my personal favorite topics, rules reform in the Massachusetts State Legislature. Can you see my screen? Great. So just to start with some background on the rules reform movement. One thing that we talk about a lot at Act on Mass, and I know comes up at Progressive Dems of Mass and many of our ally organizations, is this question: why does popular progressive legislation keep dying? We have this reputation as being a safe blue state, And yet we see repeatedly that our state house fails its constituents by delaying and killing really popular legislation, like examples on the right. Even things that are part of our party's written platform, despite our Democratic supermajority, just never get brought up to a vote. On the right, you can see a couple of examples of this. Same-day voter registration. Obviously, Secretary of State Bill Galvin has given up on them even ever doing a vote on that and is trying to take it to the ballot. But there's a couple of examples here that just have never seen a vote in our legislature. When we talk about this problem at Act on Mass, we try to break it down. Um, we envision what a state legislature should work like, which you can see on the left, where there's this interplay between voter and legislator. Every 2 years, the voter gets the chance to look at the legislator's record and then make an informed choice of their candidate for the election. And so there's this kind of interplay that results in, campaign promises being delivered on, policies that uplift millions, theoretically. We know that that's not what we're dealing with in our state house. Maybe this graphic is familiar to you. But so much of the work of our legislature happens behind closed doors, which still allows, lobbyists and corporate interests a fair amount of access while the public is denied access. And so much of the decision-making power is concentrated within House and Senate leadership that it results in a system where even our rank and file reps are disempowered to actually represent us in decision-making, which all results in, a breakdown of this kind of fundamental relationship between voter and legislator. So when we talk about this problem, we focus in on two key aspects, the lack of transparency and the concentration of power in leadership, which are kind of two leverage points. And so the push for rules reform in the legislature was drawn out of a focus on both of these. It's been a long movement. As John mentioned, I've been involved personally for 5 years. I know that the movement predates me. The movement for change in our legislature predates me and probably predates my birth. But the modern movement, shall we say, definitely began in 2019 with progressive members proposing rules changes. We had a grassroots movement in 2021, the People's House campaign. That was when I got my start in this as an organizer. We also ran transparency ballot questions in 37 districts in 2020 and 2022, asking voters whether or not they wanted their rep to support public committee votes. Unfortunately, those reforms were voted down repeatedly, and in 2023 without even a recorded vote. So there was a lot of resistance from the powers that be to open up the books and let people see what's going on. 2024 was a moment where we saw some of the fruits of the organizing work that had been done. Question 1 for a legislative audit won every city and town in Massachusetts. So that message that, we need more transparency from our legislature was really resonating. And we also saw some primary challenges focused on transparency and accountability that definitely scared the Democratic establishment a bit. So what we saw was, as John mentioned, at the beginning of the last legislative session, we actually saw some mass legislative leaders talking about transparency and efficiency and accountability. I think when I wrote my newsletter on the subject, I said that when I saw this, I almost fell out of my chair. I think we had seen transparency become somewhat of a bad word on Beacon Hill. And so, although they're co-opting this in a way that we'll discuss later, it was pretty remarkable to see that they were at least promising, saying that they were going to do some transparency. So this is the beginning of the session. Speaker Ron Mariano said that it's their responsibility to ensure that voters feel they have an efficient and transparent legislature responsive to their concerns. And they said for the first time that they were going to do rules reform. This is how that went. The rules reform, this was the beginning of last year. So we have a full-time legislature. The legislative session opens up in January. It took them a month and a half for the Senate to even have a proposal. During all this time, no one was in committee, so bills were not being considered. And it took them until the end of February, when the House finally debated their proposal, that committee assignments were actually made. Then it took another month for the conference committee to meet. And then leadership took 2 months to meet again on, what rules they were going to use for operating, which means, again, legislative work was kind of on pause, or they were operating without rules while while they waited to finalize the rules, finally released new joint rules approved on June 26th, last year, 2025. So that was the first time legislative rules had been agreed on since 2019. And the reason why it's important to highlight this timeline is just to remember what we were up against during this time. This was Donald Trump was inaugurated in office January 20th, and they still took 6 months to even decide, how they were going to do things. So they were not getting right to the work of, preparing our state and taking up policies to protect our communities. How have those new rules been going? I don't want to dampen the fact that that was really, really exciting. Like I said, I never thought that I would see that. Huge, we got public committee votes. So most committees are now required to make their votes public. They did give a little loophole for themselves where they can allow bills to expire without a public vote. But this has led to some really, really key examples of public committee votes allowing us to boost our organizing, which I'll talk about in a second. So overall, a huge win. I mean, this was our biggest demand. This is the thing they were fighting up against the most. And so it was really thrilling to see that. I list here a couple other changes they made that were, demands of our movement at various times. Public written testimony submitted to committees now has to be made public on request. Bill summaries, plain language bill summaries need to be written for every bill, which is really helpful in helping the public understand what the bills are actually doing. They have to give a 10-day notice before scheduling hearings, or they're supposed to. Drew's going to talk a little bit later about how some of these rules are being broken. They have to give hearing attendance, so you get to know if your legislator is actually going to their committee meetings. They put in a new reporting deadline, which is intended to improve efficiency. That's a little sticky, but again, we'll talk about it later. And 24 hours for conference reports to be read before they're voted on. This was part of more time to read all bills was part of an Act MS platform since 2020. So this was not a full delivery, but still exciting to see. This is where I answer the question of how's it going. We'll talk about the good stuff first. We saw these new rules in action with a recent energy bill. Obviously with spiking energy prices, there's been a lot of pressure on our state legislature to act on energy affordability. I'll quibble with the fact that they waited until November, which is right before winter, to even do the first attempt. But again, as I demonstrated, they were not necessarily moving with efficiency. So this was November, the first crack at an energy affordability bill, which is adapted from one that had been filed by Governor Heille, was released from the TUE Committee, Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy. And this bill contained a massive poison pill that appeared to have been written by the fossil fuel industry. It would have rolled back Massachusetts' 2030 climate goals and made them unenforceable. What was really exciting about this was that there was a public committee vote, even when it was going through committee. And so we knew that meant that constituents were aware and able to apply public pressure despite this. There was only 48 hours that they were voting on it. And what we saw was actually that 2 Democratic reps voted off from the chair, which is not something we see often at all. And there was this tremendous amount of public backlash around the committee vote. So we were able to hold individual members of the committee accountable, knowing that they would have a public vote. So even though the bill did pass its committee, the public backlash made it clear to leadership that they couldn't push it through very quickly, and so they decided to rewrite the bill. This was huge. They were trying to, release this from committee and vote on it 2 days later, and the fact that we had a public vote in the committee meant that we were able to have public input on what was going on. In February, they released a new draft from House Ways and Means. It was improved. It didn't include the rollback of our 2030 climate goals, but it did include a $1 billion cut to Mass Save. Again, because there had been precedent set that progressive Democrats could vote off from the chair, there was a split committee vote in Ways and Means. At least 2 members voted to reserve their rights, and 7 Democrats took no action. Then it moved towards the floor. Representatives have 48 hours to read a 105-page bill, so we're still working on some transparency changes. But because there had already been the debacle in November, citizens were already mobilized. So having had that additional accountability step, the first time meant that people knew that this bill was coming up. We actually saw debate between Democrats on the House floor, which we hadn't seen in a really long time. And 16 Democrats voted off from the speaker, which was the most since 2022. Doesn't sound like a lot. In fact, that's really a condemnation of our legislature that we can celebrate that 16 Democrats voted differently from the speaker on cutting $1 billion from our state's landmark energy efficiency program. But, it was for me an example of what additional transparency in the committee process can bring us on the floor, because people are aware that their constituents are paying attention and have been following this bill through the process. Um, we're going to
Scotia,
talk some more. Yeah.
one quick thing. Somebody asked, what does vote off mean? Can you just
Oh,
explain
great
what you,
question. It just means they vote differently. So typically we have a legislature where 9 out of 10 Democrats vote with the speaker 100% of the time. So basically the speaker's vote is 90% of the caucus's vote. So the voting off means that they voted differently from that member of leadership. Sorry, I should have said that. Drew's going to talk some more about the rest of the rules. The takeaway is that there's rampant rule breaking on a lot of these measures, which prompted grassroots watchdog work from us. And Drew developed the Beacon Hill tracker. So he's going to talk about that. To Drew.
Thank you,
You're
Scotia.
muted, John.
so, so go ahead, Drew. Tell us what's really going on up there. And thank you for doing this. This is great.
All right, let me share my screen. How's it coming through?
It's working.
Thank you. All right, one moment. Okay, thank you. So thank you for coming to today's Rules Reform Forum. I'm Drew Bowler, an independent software engineer and the author of the Beacon Hill Compliance Tracker, which you can find at beaconhilltracker.org. Today's presentation revolves around an analysis of the joint rules adopted in 2025, which Scotia just went over. So the adoption, tracking, and outcomes associated with those. To do this, we spent the past couple months working on this automated tracker, which scrapes the legislature's site daily and compiles a compliance report of the joint rules. So we're going to dive into why this was needed, what it solves, what it's found, and what to do with it. So in 2025, we succeeded in pushing for a new set of joint rules for the Massachusetts legislature. But months later, it became clear that tracking them in any meaningful capacity was a full-time job. So you don't have to zoom into the bottom right, but this is a spreadsheet that was being used to manually track the rules at the time that I found out about this project. And you can see how convoluted and tricky it is. And a big part of the reason for that is that documentation was posted inconsistently in different places and in different formats. So sometimes committees would post votes and summaries in big packets. So one file would contain a bunch. Other times they would post them individually. Sometimes they would post them on the bill page or the committee page or the hearing page, and there's no way to know where they would live. And sometimes they were PDFs or Word documents or embedded on the website itself. So it took a team of people highly keyed into the legislative process who knew what to look for, where to look for it, and when, just to find out if the rules were being followed. And as days and weeks of searching by hand unfolded, the deadlines that they were tracking were passing in real time. And to their credit, they still did it. So these people were tracking committee by committee, bill by bill, looking in all these different places to see if the rules were being followed and calculating it by hand. But you can imagine that if it's this hard to track the rules, then it's really hard to know if they're actually being followed or not. So we built the Beacon Hill compliance tracker to target 4 core rules: the 10 days advance notice ahead of hearings, up from 72 hours advance notice; summaries for each bill ahead of hearings; earlier structured reporting deadlines, so 60 to 90 days for House bills, or calendar date anchored deadlines for Senate bills; and committee votes posted publicly. So a quick note, which I'll dive into in a second, but scraps of this information can be found via third-party tools, watchdog reports, and manual parsing. But the goal of this tool is a targeted approach to collecting, evaluating, and presenting this data every morning all in one place. So, um, so a quick note on methodology before moving on. I won't zoom super far into this because it gets a little technical, but I think it's important to know at a high level what we're trying to do. So this is an algorithm written in code, which every night starts at the legislature's homepage, follows the link to every single committee. From every single committee, it searches every single bill under their umbrella. And then for every single bill, it searches the known locations and formats for documentation. So you can imagine over thousands of bills and about a dozen possible permutations for every bill. That's tens and thousands of checks every single night to find if these things even exist. And that's not even to comment on the content of them, but just a simple presence check. Even for a computer algorithm, this takes all night. But as it goes along, it's able to learn and predict where committees tend to post things and how they tend to post things to make sure that we can deliver a report by morning, every single morning. So once it finds either a piece of evidence in one of its checks, or once it fails to find it across all those locations, it pushes the results that it found through a rules check to see if it's compliant, non-compliant, or provisional. So compliant meaning all the rules were followed, all the deadlines were met. Non-compliant meaning one or more rules were broken. And provisional is a third status, meaning we're not all the way through the deadlines yet, but no rules have yet been broken. So it's not quite compliant because there's still a ways to go, but nothing has tipped the balance yet, so we're tracking it. So 3 statuses across thousands of bills. And yeah, so every morning the site updates with the latest findings from the previous day. So as of this week, last time I ran the tool, the total compliance rate across the 2025 to 2026 session is less than half. So more than 5 out of 10 bills break at least one of the new rules. Here's a breakdown of how those rules tend to be broken. So, quick note, I broke the reporting deadline into 2 types of rules broken for this chart. So we're tracking 4, but a missed deadline can mean either it was late or we're past the deadline and it's still missing. So that's why there are 5 bars for 4 rules. As you can see, a late reporting deadline is by far the most common violation type, but vote violations are really high up there. So vote violations represent around half of all total bills. A quick note on this chart, this is total times this rule is broken, not number of bills that broke the rule, meaning if a bill is missing a vote and a summary, that's 1 bill, but 2 violations per this chart. So the numbers add up to vastly more than 7,300, just the total number of bills. According to what I found, about 60% of bills break just 1 rule, and then 40% break 2 or more. And a key part of how rules are broken is that this tells us how public access to the legislative process is affected. So, um, so missed hearing notice, for example, or late hearing notice can come in the form of like 1 or 2 or 7 days advance notice when the standard is 10. So that fundamentally affects how citizens can prepare and organize in preparation for testifying at a hearing. And missed votes and slip deadlines represent the other end of the process, where you find out how your legislators voted and if you want to support them in the future or hold them accountable or um, react to what actually happened. So, depending on the committee, you can find that different committees have different combinations of the types of rule that tend to break and how. And how that happens can tell you a lot about what you're missing out on as a citizen. So, I'm going to move through the next 4 slides. Oh, quick question. Yeah, so vote violation means no public record of the vote. Um, so a note on the tracker, just before I move on, it is not necessarily an authoritative source in the sense that the legislature site is the official site, and if it exists on the site, it exists. So the tracker is something that I've been working on for months, and it does a pretty good job of finding everything. Um, but if the tracker says that a vote is missing, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that a software tracker that checks dozens of locations wasn't able to find it. Um, but I do check every single day to make sure that the bills marked non-compliant are definitively non-compliant. So compliant bills, I link all of the evidence. So if I say a summary exists, the summary is linked. Same with the votes, and the reasoning is given. And then for non-compliant bills, I each bill that is marked to non-compliant has a reason for why it was marked non-compliant. So it will say no vote found, deadline late by X number of days, hearing notice was too short. So, and I regularly check this, and I regularly check the email inbox to make sure that anyone who happens to find a concerning item can reach out to me and check, is this accurate or not? And the code is all open source, so anyone with a bit of tech savvy can dive in and see if there's anything that they would contribute or want to add to make it more accurate. But broadly speaking, I rigorously check all of the non-compliant bills because it's the most damning part of the project, is saying that a rule was broken or something doesn't exist. It's the hardest thing to prove. So I go through usually once every morning, and the tool highlights any questionable cases and I manually verify those. So the next 4 slides go into a little bit more detail. I'm going to go over them kind of quickly, but the full slide deck will be posted on the tracker site if you want to review it. I thought it was interesting to see the numbers, but it's not important to memorize or read through every single one I'm about to show. So I'm going to go through it kind of quickly, but just know it exists. So bill summary violations, as I noted earlier, affect how you can parse the legalese before a hearing and prepare find out if it's relevant to you, find out if the title of the bill matches your expectations, and dive in and organize. So there are only 600, 700 violations here, which is under 10%, which compared to the others is pretty good. Interestingly, and I'm not sure why, most of the violations are in the House and not the Senate. And for each slide, you'll see the breakdown on the left. Hearing notice violations, so this one roughly doubles. This is how much time you have to read the summary, see if it's relevant to you, prepare, organize people to go with you, and testify. So If you have 10 days advance notice, that gives you the most time to take time off work or figure out how you're going to get to the hearing and testify or what you're going to say. So this one seems to be most impacted by what I call legacy workflows. So committees that had very, very short hearing notice in the past tended to increase their hearing notice after the rules, but not always by enough, hence the number of violations. Committee votes, this is where it starts to really ramp up. So committee votes are how you hold your legislators accountable after the fact. You see if they voted yes, no, or reserve rights. So this breakdown shows that there's a correlation. The more bills a committee tends to process, the more votes they tend to miss posting, which makes logical sense. But these committees also handle important things. A committee that handles a lot of bills gives you the most information. And so when committee votes are missing, you as a citizen are losing out on the information that you use to decide if you want to vote for a legislator or not. So Scotia highlighted the importance in specific instances of knowing how your legislator voted. They're missing about half the time. And then reporting deadline violations, by far the biggest category in aggregate. I broke it down by missed deadlines versus late, same as the other slide. But this is how bills can get buried. So if you don't know when the outcome of a bill is going to be posted, it's really hard as a citizen to know when to check the site, when to follow up, when to know if the bill that you were following is being acted on or not. So late deadlines hurt because it can be days, weeks, or months after the fact that after it's supposed to be acted upon, that it actually does. And in the cases where it's missed entirely, you never know when it's late if it's going to be one of those bills. So this is the violation that most bills that break at least one rule have, and it throws a lot of chaos into the end arc of the process a bill takes through committee. But the rules, this presentation revolves around a lot of the ways that the rules were broken, but it's really important to emphasize that the rules did have a positive impact. So the chart on the right, I know it's hard to zoom into, full thing is on the site, but the important thing is there's a lot of green. So on the left side, there are green bars and red bars. Red bars represent hearing notice days before the change, and green bars represent the hearing notice after the change. Change being the joint rules. As you can see, there are a lot of green bars. So once these rules were implemented, committees did meaningfully increase the number of days advance notice they give for hearings. The green bars all the way on the right show the increase before and after. So only one committee actually gave fewer days advance notice after the rules change than after. But the vast majority, all but three, actually measurably increased how much hearing notice they gave. Bills were reported out late more often than they were buried. So even though there are a lot of late violations, most of those deadline violations are just late. They're not completely missing. And summaries were posted over 92% of the time, which is a win. So, although the tracker does shine a spotlight on a lot of the ways that the rules were broken, it also shows why the rules were needed in the first place. So, just to review, the gaps are that documentation is hard to find. So it would be great if the legislature could post it in a consistent format in a consistent location so you're not guessing if it exists and if it exists where, and once you know where, how. So the tracker right now, as far as I know, represents the only way to actually find these core metrics, and it's 100% external. I've actually reached out to the legislature's IT team to try to ask questions about the website or how to find things, and I didn't get a response. So the only way to track the legislature's following of the own rules is to do it yourself right now, which is tough. And the rules have a lot of workarounds. So as Scotia noted, there are loopholes and there are ways in which they're easy to slip. So there's still work to be done, but this does represent tangible progress, which is good. So the rules made a real impact. Compliance is good, but transparency is better. So now we have the numbers that tell us how the rules were followed, but it would be great to take that and do something with it. Um, and productivity is now a trackable metric. So you can look at the site, and without the tracker, you can get a sense that, okay, things are missing or things are late. But now we know how many things are missing and how late things are. So the rules enable us to set a baseline with which we can say if something was followed or not. So what do we do with that? I put together 3 tiers of ways that you can jump in and help. So looking at the tracker and familiarizing with the issue and just sharing the general concept with people is a great way to raise awareness of the lack of transparency in the legislature and get people involved. I think the past couple years, I'm someone who wasn't in this reform effort prior to 2025, and all of the great work that Scotia and the coalition to reform our legislature have done has it got me into tracking it and wanting to see what was actually happening. So getting more people involved is great. So forwarding the committee's compliance data to advocates. So if someone's working on an MBTA bill, say, hey, look, they're always late, votes are always missing. That's actionable right away. Because from there, you can contact your legislators and say, hey, votes are often missing, or you never post summaries, or asking where those documents are. And that, which I've done a couple times to find that there were cases where it was really deeply hidden in the website, but it was present. So raising awareness and raising the legislators' awareness of your awareness is a great way to push for positive change based on the findings of the tracker, based on the content of the rules. And then lastly, I didn't talk about stipend reform in this presentation, but as Scotia noted, the stipend reform ballot question in November touches upon productivity of legislators as a means for basing stipend pay. So with the tracker, there's now a trackable, objective way to measure productivity in really granular numbers. So, keying into the stipend reform ballot question and using this as leverage is a great, huge step this year to take the effort and findings from these 2 presentations and focus them on one of the biggest changes coming up. Thank you very much. That's all for me. Special thanks to John Cohn, Scotia Hille, and John Hecht for all the help.
Drew, we have 2 questions in the chat. I wonder if I could bounce off you. One says, basically asks, how do you deal with bills where the committee votes to give it an extension beyond the normal deadline? Is that, do you rate that as late nonetheless?
Yeah, so the question is if they file an extension beyond the 60, 90 days normally set out by the rules.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the purpose of the tool, I do track that as non-compliant for 2 main reasons. One being that the format that those additional extensions are posted in can tend to be pretty inconsistent. So I can find the normal 60 to 90 day extensions pretty reliably, but applying that rule fairly to every single bill is nearly impossible with that type of extension, as it's much less consistent on the legislator's site. And although that's the main reason, I also feel that the point of the joint rules was to set specific deadlines. And so in cases where those rules are constantly circumvented, it does seem to sidestep the intent and spirit of the rules and leave people wondering when these bills will actually be acted upon. And there are also cases where those extended deadlines are missed anyway. So the tracker does not count those as compliant as of today.
Great, thank you. And the second one says, question about how the data reflect joint committees. And it notes that for the Joint Revenue Committee, it cited 100 violations, but for the entire Senate, there were only 54. So given this a joint committee with the Senate, how do you make sense of that joint committee versus the chamber?
Yeah, so the prefix of the bill, H or S, determines the chamber that the bill originated in. So that's how I separated it between House and Senate. So per the joint rules, the chamber that originates in is the chamber that acts upon it for the vote. So, so for that calculation, these all reference joint committees, not House or Senate committees, but I track the chamber of origin for the bills for the purpose of comparison for those charts.
Great. Thank you very much, Drew. That was very helpful. And thank you for these data. They're incredibly valuable to have.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
you're quite welcome. So Denise, can you reflect on all this from your time and experience in the legislature? What do you think?
Well, thank you, John, and thank you to my colleague in absentia, John Hecht, for his fortitude. When I left the legislature, I have stayed as far away as possible. So the fact that Act on Mass and the Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts and the Beacon Hill Tracker and the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature exist and work is thrilling to me because, when John and I were trying to organize the pro-democracy movement in the House, it was hard. It was hard. But you all are making it easier for more people to be activists. There have always been legislative watchdogs, but it's hard for anybody, including watchdogs in the legislature, to watch what we cannot see. And as you all know, a lot of what goes on in the legislature is in a black box. And if you try to get at what's in the black box, you find it's protected by a stone wall. And you all have brought chisels to that stone wall. And a lot of these, I realize, are possible because of technology. Although what I've seen in the House is the use of technology to become less transparent and democratic, but you've counteracted that in a powerful way. Just to give you an idea of a little bit of the history of technology in the House that has not been good. Evidently, under Tom Finneran, who was before my time, he would not put a computer on the desks of legislators because he believed they would only use them to play games, buy things online, and look at pornography. So fortunately, by the time I got there, when Sal DeMacy was speaker, we had computers on our desks. And, these were big communications advance. So we would get notice of hearings often, which was almost always very short notice, which, as you note, makes it very hard to prepare, which I think was part of the point. When it comes to specifics, I'll raise the example of committee votes. When I was first in the legislature in 2006, the practice in committees was to have what they called an executive session, which is opposite to a municipal one, because it was public. There was no public input, but the public could watch when the committee members sat around and took votes on an agenda of bills. There was still a lot of conformity in these votes, but sometimes legislators took the brave step of reserving their rights because there's a lot of pressure to conform. And that was something, as has been noted. What happened over the time I was there was that instead of convening as a committee, the chairman would have a staffer send out email to committee members that had a long list of bills and the question, will you vote with the chairman on these bills? The chairman recommends these votes. Will you do that? And it made it harder to vote off because you had to look up every bill. And you couldn't have that personal interaction with colleagues. You couldn't even have eye contact, let alone, chat before the session or pass notes. And I think that kind of isolation, which email can bring, has a very bad effect on every phase of legislative business. On the other side, you in the dissident groups are watchdogs who are able to do more than you ever could in the past because you can use email to communicate. You can use meetings like this, online meetings, to gather people, and we can see each other's eyes. So I think that's huge right there. And passing these, getting the legislature to pass the joint rules that include some of your recommended reforms has been massive. I don't think enough people know about the rule changes and certainly don't know yet about the Beacon Hill tracker, but these have so much potential, these tools. And I see several groups who can benefit from using them, not the least members of the legislature. The House especially, the Senate is a lot more collegial, and it's harder to stonewall within a group of 40 than in a group of 160. And you figured out certainly that there are insiders even within the House there, and that's where the committee chairs come from. And about stipend reform, so you all know how that works. So legislators are obviously going to benefit from the outside push for rules reform and the accountability from Beacon Hill tracker. The value of data, and how that puts power and influence into your narrative about the shortcomings of Beacon Hill. It's not just subjective. So obviously, activists, probably your primary user universe, and can use this all the time. Voters will be informed by it. And those activists who finally move beyond frustration to becoming candidates themselves, have this wonderful package of opposition research, basically, so that there's a more even playing field between incumbents and folks who want to challenge the status quo. And that's all of you. So I'm grateful. You can all contact me if you want to talk about any of this stuff further. But I'm dazzled by your efforts and deeply grateful, as should the whole voting public in Massachusetts be grateful. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. And I thank you for underscoring something that Drew touched on, and well, in Scotia too, and that's that we need to publicize the fact of the rules changes themselves and of this Beacon Hill tracker. The data there is just invaluable. As I think Drew suggested, share it with your reps and senators. Ask them about it. Ask why their committees are not meeting the new rules. And actually, Denise, I think you underscored a very important point: is share it with candidates. So people who are running can highlight this as an issue, because we have some great candidates out there who are running, who are highlighting the issues of legislative dysfunction and what we can do about them. And this is a great, great tool for them to have and to use. And I think, Denise, the other point you made that I think is so important, that's behind all this work that all of us are doing, is that we want to empower legislators so that they can truly represent their constituents and not feel that they have to be responsive to legislative leaders for a variety of reasons. Although that's got a lot of work. That's got a long way to go. But this is a help, and this is a first step. And it also allows the representatives then to do what many of them ran and wanted to do: to set good policy, to contribute their expertise and their viewpoints and their effort to making Massachusetts and our policies better for all of us. I do just want to maybe point of personal privilege to some extent, but Drew mentioned stipend reform. And as I mentioned, I am the chair of the ballot committee that's pushing this. So I've put in the chat the link to the ballot committee's website. There's a great 2-minute video there that Evan Mackay and John Hecht did about stipend reform. Just 2 minutes. It's wonderfully entertaining. And also a link to the one-pager on the site about stipend reform, why we need it, and what the ballot question will do. I also put my email there. Feel free to contact me if you have questions. And the big thing we need now is we need people to volunteer to help collect signatures. I think many of you probably know all about the ballot process, but we collected 95,000 signatures in the fall to qualify for the ballot process. Between May 7th and June 17th, a tight 6-week window, we need to collect 12,000 plus more signatures of certified voters. And these, for those of you who are on the inside on this, those have to be different people than signed the first time. So we can't just go back to our same set of friends and groups and Democratic town committees or whatever organizations. On the other hand, if somebody's willing to sign, get them to sign. The town election clerks or city election clerks will just simply cross off a name if it was there before. So you don't need to worry about it being a duplicate, but just be aware of that as you go out and help us to collect signatures. And just a very brief background on why we need this. Currently, the legislative leaders, the House Speaker and Senate President, hand out $5.4 million annually in additional pay, what we call loyalty pay, to legislators by assigning them or appointing them to, quote, leadership positions, some of which have no leadership role, do absolutely nothing. And then, of course, as you also know, they can take that away by removing their leadership role if they do something they don't like. So stipend reform is one of the critical, necessary but not sufficient reforms to make our legislature really work and be more transparent, accountable, and effective and responsive to all of us as voters. I guess unless Scotia or Drew or Denise, you have any final comments you'd like to make, I guess we're only got a couple minutes left, and it's probably better to end a couple minutes early than a couple minutes late. So I will leave it there and just encourage you all to get involved with collecting signatures for stipend reform, and go to the site. You can sign up at the website, of course, for the committee, or you can email me directly, either one, and we will get you plugged in And as I say, we will get the signature forms from the Secretary of State on or about May 7th, and then be in this mad rush to get those 12,000 signatures, which have to be into the town clerks or city clerks to be certified by June 17th. Any final comments, or should we call it a day? Thank you all for being here. This has been awesome. What a great panel and incredible information, inside information about how the legislature really works or doesn't work, as the case may be. All right, thank you all. Have a great day, and we will see you at our next PDM forum. Keep you posted.